Hi, I'm Keon, a research analyst with Thomson Reuters Lipper. I'm here to speak to you about fund flow activity for the week ended Wednesday, February 8th. Let's start by taking a quick look at the market activity for the week. Both the Dow Jones Industrial Average and the S&P 500 index managed to eke out small gains for the week. The Dow was up 0.82% and the S&P was up 0.66%. The markets took strength from a better than expected jobs report, January jobs report. The economy added 227 jobs for the month. Another driver for the positive returns last week was President Trump's signing an executive order to have the Dodd-Frank legislation reviewed in what could be a possible first step in the reduction in financial regulations. Let's turn our attention back now to the week's fund flows activity. We'll start by taking a look at the four fund macro groups. Equity mutual funds had net inflows of $555 million last week. Taxable bond funds took in $4.5 billion in net new money. Muni bond funds, net inflows of $366 million. And finally, money market funds grew their coffers by about $1.3 billion last week. Let's take a closer look at the equity group now, starting with the mutual funds. The $555 million in net inflows was really technically the first net inflows in roughly 47 weeks. If you recall, back at the end of the year, I believe it was the weekend of December 28th, we did have a net inflow, but it was really more of a timing issue related to a distribution from a fund. So this was could be a turning point, some enthusiasm there for equity mutual funds. As usual, we see the non-domestic equity group leading the charge. Net inflows of roughly $582 million last week, while domestic equity funds saw $27 million leave. Let's turn our attention now to the ETF side for equities. The group had net inflows of $1.9 billion last week. This was led by the SPDR Dow Jones Industrial Average product, which had net inflows of just over $1.1 billion, and followed closely by the Healthcare Select Sector SPDR product, which had net inflows of just under $1.1 billion. The largest outflow belonged to the SPDR S&P 500, which saw about $3.1 billion leave their coffers. Let's move on to the taxable bond groups now. We'll start with taking a look at the mutual funds. Taxable bond mutual funds took in about $4.5 billion of net new money last week. This runs their streak of consecutive net inflows to 6 weeks. Once again, leading the charge was loan participation funds. Net inflows of roughly $750 million last week, bringing their total since the election to about $9.3 billion in positive flows. As we've spoken about in the past, the bank loan group has benefited both from the rising interest rate environment we appear to be in and Trump's campaign promise of less financial regulations. Let's turn our attention now to taxable bond ETFs. The group had net inflows of $3.1 billion last week, their third consecutive week of net inflows. Leading the charge here was the iShares iBoxx investment grade corporate product. Net inflows right around $1 billion. Followed by the SPDR Bloomberg Barclays High Yield Bond ETF, which was just over $400 million in net new money. And finally, the largest outflow belonged to the iShares iBoxx High Yield Corporate product, which saw roughly $200 million leave. Moving on now, we'll take a look at our Muni Bond Fund group. The fifth straight week of inflows for this group. Muni Bonds took in about $366 million last week. Once again, National Munis, specifically the High Yield Muni Debt Funds Group, was responsible for the lion's share of this net increase as they took in roughly $280 million last week. Our last group to take a look at is money market funds. Money market funds had overall positive flows of $1.3 billion last week. The week's activity was marked by volatility within the peer groups, with the largest moves belonging to U.S. government money market funds, which took in $3.5 billion, and institutional U.S. government money market funds, which saw about $3.2 billion leave. Well, that wraps up this week's report. If you'd like to take a closer look at the data for yourself, please join us at our website, www.lipperusfundflows.com, and please join us here again next week where another one of our analysts will be speaking about that week's fund flows activity.